Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to Junia Doan's The Spark. I'm Junia Doan. Thank you for joining me. My guest today is ScottDikkers, comedy writer, cartoonist, entrepreneur, New York Times best-selling author, and founder of the first humor website, theonion.com. Welcome, Scott. You said that all humor has an element of surprise in it, but it has to, in your opinion anyway, fall into 11 categories. What categories of humor really make you, that you prefer or enjoy?
Yeah, so this is after years of studying humor and how to write comedy that I came up with these 11 different categories of humor.
Yeah.
And I think of them, I call them funny filters, because basically you take your opinion and you filter them through one of these 11 literary devices, and that gets you humor. Humor that we would understand as humor, that feels like professionally written humor. And there are 11 different kinds, and everybody's different. We all have our own different sense of humor, so different people maybe favor ones over other ones. So there are things like irony, there are things like hyperbole, misplaced focus, madcap. Character is a big one, just highlighting a person's character traits.
Right.
And literally the way it works is you introduce a character, you establish their traits, and then you show them acting on those traits. That's it. That's a joke. And that's what you get on most TV sitcoms, actually. We know who the characters are. Let's say it's Homer Simpson. He's lazy and he's stupid, or whatever. So if you show him acting lazy and stupid, it's funny. Like that, people love that. And that's a big one. My favorite is madcap. And that's physical humor or non sequitur humor. Anything that's crazy or wacky that kind of defies description, like, you know, sort of slipping on a banana peel type stuff. And the Brits were great at it, and they're sort of known as the great madcap comedians, like, you know, Monty Python and the Ministry of Silly Walks and stuff like that. Americans are very restrained. We're very repressed, and we don't do a lot of madcap.
We're thoughtful.
I don't know if we're thoughtful, but we don't do a lot of madcap. Jim Carrey is probably the most madcap comedian that we've produced.
Where
recently.
would you fit the Marx Brothers of the 30s?
They were definitely madcap.
Okay.
Yeah, so their movie Duck Soup is a madcap farce
Yes.
that had great subtext, and that's what makes madcap work for me, is when it has really good subtext. Going back to the Ministry of Silly Walks, maybe everybody who knows Monty Python knows that sketch where it's a government agency that develops silly ways of walking. And John Cleese had a wooden knee so he could lift his leg way over his face as he walked. And it was hilarious just physically. But it had great subtext because it was making fun of wasteful government bureaucracy. Because here's a government agency that's developing silly ways to walk, and they're very serious about it. So that's kind of how that works. All those funny filters have to have some subtext, which is like an opinion, whatever you feel about the world or whatever, and then you filter it through one of these literary devices and you get humor.
Do archetypes play into when you say character and they...
Absolutely. Yeah, so there are several very well-established character archetypes that largely developed through the Commedia dell'arte, the Italian Renaissance theater, and we still use them today. People like the man-child or woman-child, who is a grown person who acts like a child. People love that. Will Ferrell is always playing that character in movies. There are other things like the dummy. We mentioned Homer Simpson, just somebody who's not very bright. We love that. We always laugh at that character. My favorite is the bumbling authority, who is someone in charge, and usually a low level of authority. They're a school principal, a mall cop, a pet detective, you name it. And they always have a badge. They're always showing you their badge because they're very proud. Like their authority hinges on this official designation that they've been given authority. But they're idiots. They're bumbling. And that has great subtext because that makes fun of power structures and authorities.
Yes.
And people love seeing authority figures brought down to size. They love lampooning the establishment and leaders of any kind. So that's one of my
interesting.
favorite archetypes.
Does people's sense of humor change over a lifetime?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, mine shifts. Like, I like madcap now, but I think when I was younger, I liked irony more. Irony is a little bit more of a sort of thoughtful, speaking of being thoughtful. And also the culture changes. When National Lampoon was ascending, the primary funny filter that was working for people was shock, because they would just do really offensive humor and shocking humor and just trying to push the envelope. And now that feels a little tired to people. There's
Yes.
some, but it always has more of a madcap element. So like millennials and the generation under tend to really favor madcap, which again is non sequitur type humor
Yes.
and wacky physical humor, and humor that doesn't really make a lot of sense, just like nonsense.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's like fashion. It just sort of changes and evolves over time.
On the other side of it, on creating humor, can you teach yourself to be a creator of humor?
Most people do. Yeah, people who decide to become funny or want to become funny, and typically the reason they do that is because they had some kind of miserable childhood and they turn to humor as a way to cope. This is 99 times out of 100, this is what you see in like professional comedy people. And they teach themselves. So nobody's born funny, nobody knows how to tell a joke, but if you're young and you realize that, okay, this is the way I need to cope, let's say your parents don't give you love, but if you're funny, if you're amusing and they laugh, you're getting some love, you're getting some affection and some attention.
It's positive.
It's positive. You're going to want to move in that direction. So you're going to say, oh, okay, so that worked. What else would work? And then you start, subconsciously becoming funny. And you see a lot of people who, a couple of examples would be like Eddie Murphy or Chris Farley, who broke onto the scene very young, like 18, 19 years old. These guys were like rocket ships, and everybody was like, oh my God, they're so talented. And Eddie Murphy gets on SNL straight away. Chris Farley shows up at Second City in Chicago, and they just put him on the main stage immediately, which never happens. Normally people go through a huge process. And they see those people as incredibly talented, but I don't believe in talent. I believe they developed their skills because of whatever dynamic they grew up in, where they realized they needed to be funny, and they got really good at it on the schoolyard, whatever, with peers, making peers laugh, with family, whatever the case. So even people who are really talented still had to go through that learning process. Now, this begs the question, can someone learn after they're an adult and they decide, I'd like to do comedy, this might be fun? Yes, because you can enroll in comedy classes. Many colleges now are developing comedy studies programs that are accredited. They're teaching satire in school, and the Second City has been around for 50 years now, and they teach improv and they teach sketch writing. And I developed a program there that teaches prose writing, and anybody can come in and learn it. People with zero comedy experience will come into my class, and they'll learn about subtext and the 11 funny filters, and etc. And in a few months, they're selling work to comedy publications.
Fantastic. Now, when you started The Onion as a college student, what frame of mind do you think you were in? I mean,
well,
that's such a bold thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, technically speaking, I was not a student. I was a college dropout at that time.
Okay,
so
let's hear it.
What was my mindset? I was desperate because I knew that I needed to make a living doing comedy in some way, but I didn't know how and didn't know where that would come from. Luckily, I'd had success with a comic strip that I had created and was making a pretty good living doing my comic strip. I still had a day job. I worked at a public radio station, but that was easy because it was one of those kind of automated stations where the shift was every hour I had to push a button. So for that whole hour, I would draw my comics and I would do other work. And so the opportunity to start The Onion came around when these two entrepreneurial students at the UW-Madison came to me because of my popular comic strip and had this idea of starting a college humor magazine. And I thought it was great. I thought they were really sharp and cool guys. And so I jumped right in with them and we started developing it. And so it was all, kind of a desperate need to make a living doing comedy. And The Onion felt like it had a business model, because these guys, one of them had worked to sell ads for one of the student newspapers, and so he knew how that worked. You sell ads in the paper, that pays for the printing, and then you just have to fill the space where there's no ads. That's where I came in, coming up with jokes, coming up with stories that would, cartoons that would go in that space. And over time, ideally, circulation increases, you get more advertising, and it started to seem like, okay, this is a smart, business decision. This is a good entrepreneurial endeavor that could actually work. Didn't seem like it at first, because it was very,
Nothing
very
does at first.
seat of your pants, and there was no investment money. We were lucky to pay the bills every month for probably the first 3 or 4 years. So, but it was a labor of love. Everybody loved doing it, and it was fun, and it's what I needed and wanted to be doing, was comedy. So I stuck with it.
Did you stay with them?
No, they left about a year into it and sold it to me and 2 other people, and then me and one of them bought out the third. So for most of the Onion's first 15 years or so, it was co-owned by me and my business partner, and I was in charge of editorial and he was in charge of business, because he knew how to sell ads.
And who was the entrepreneur? Because the website and now Onion Labs, the advertising agency, who has that vision?
Yeah, so because I was in charge of editorial, the editorial vision was always up to me. Up until about the year 2000, I left, I thought, for good. But then the new owners hired me back for a few years in the mid-2000s, and then again in the early 20-teens. And so, yeah, in terms of entrepreneur, who was that? I never considered myself that, but I guess I am, because even before The Onion, I was doing my comic strip, which was a very entrepreneurial thing. I sent it out to newspapers, I self-syndicated it, I self-published a book, and I had to learn how to do all this stuff. And I guess I was lucky that it was making money, because I think a lot of entrepreneurial efforts are driven by pure passion. And people don't necessarily look at, okay, can this make me money? Is this a profitable? The smart entrepreneurs do that, but I never learned how to do that or anything. So I've made plenty of mistakes. I've done other things that didn't work. The comic strip worked, The Onion worked. My business partner, he was in charge of the money and the business.
Right.
So if there's any sort of entrepreneurship involved in that, that was his responsibility. Mine was the editorial vision. And then you mentioned Onion Labs. So I started developing Onion Labs in about 2012, I want to say. The Onion had started doing web video in the mid-2000s. And it was a new venture for us, and it was really exciting. The bandwidth had gotten to the point where you could put videos online.
Yes.
People could actually watch them without waiting for an hour while it downloaded or whatever. And they got really successful, and many of them were viral hits, and we won a Peabody for those, which was amazing.
Yeah.
This life is very funny sometimes. So in about 2012, the ad sales staff was at the point where they needed to sell packages of video advertising to go with our videos. And so we already had this video production infrastructure that we had invested in. So the thought was, well, let's help advertisers come up with ideas that we can produce, and we'll be like an in-house ad agency. And so we put together this whole new staff to come up with ideas. And so the way it would work is an advertiser would come to us, let's say it's a company that makes laundry soap. And we would go to the staff and say, okay, come up with ideas that have to do with laundry soap. And we wouldn't give them the product name, because we didn't, we wanted to have integrity. We didn't want it to be like a total sellout where it's like, okay, McDonald's wants to buy some ads, make some funny jokes that make McDonald's look good. Weren't interested in that. The way The Onion's always worked is people just came up with ideas from nowhere, whatever they're thinking about. That's the idea, and we assess those ideas, and we go with the ones that we think are the funniest, and we write them up as stories. We wanted to reproduce that in an ad agency. So when you get a bunch of people coming up with ideas, generic ideas about laundry soap, some of them are going to be really funny.
Right.
Relatable, funny, interesting. That's another one of the funny filters, is reference, which is like little relatable observations about daily life people love. And then you put your best ideas together, you take them back to the advertiser, and they like one or two of those, and like, okay, there's our campaign. And so we develop that, and the advertiser buys, the time and the production and everything. And so I quickly left after doing that because I'm not really interested in doing advertising work.
Right.
And it's run by very competent people now who have experience in advertising. And it's a going concern, and that's how the Onion makes a lot of its money, is by developing ad campaigns for advertisers that run on the Onion's website. And it's all this integrated advertising stuff. Again, I'm not such a huge fan of that, so, but I know it's a reality that you have to make money.
I was sort of listening, and I read that the idea was that you took that and you took it to there's the brand, you take it to the extreme, and somehow that reflects back better on the brand. And that was really an interesting, that exaggeration enhances.
Yeah, hyperbole, which is comic exaggeration, is one of the 11 funny filters. And so, yeah, and that's kind of a theory that I developed at the Onion and learned how to make the Onion grow in kind of big ways, was to try to exaggerate what we were to people. Like, what is our brand identity? Who are we? Let's be the most outrageous version of that we can be. And that's what will get people talking. That's what will market us really well, because it'll generate word of mouth, things will go viral, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, transplanting that to Onion Labs was definitely, almost unconscious, because it's part of the Onion's culture. It's how we do ideas. We're always trying to go for the funniest, most outrageous idea. And so I tell marketing people, like, the secret to the Onion's success as a brand, when you're talking about brand marketing, is that we lived the most outrageous version of ourselves. And I would recommend that to any company. I think too many companies are too committee driven and too conservative, and so they don't take risks and they don't do anything crazy that, again, really lives up to the true meaning of their brand. So take a really conservative brand, for example, like Walgreens.
Right.
They're really good at that because their brand is convenience. They're all about convenience. And so they will do the most outrageously convenient things. They will move a Walgreens 2 doors down if a more convenient location opens up. That's outrageous. Yeah. And so it works for anybody. And then people identify the brand by that, and it's a way of establishing the sort of character of the brand.
So advertising wasn't for you. You turned it over. What is for you at this stage in your life?
Yeah, so I still like coming up with jokes, but as I've gotten older, like, coming up with jokes, especially jokes about the news or whatever, is a young person's game, because it's a treadmill and it's very hard work, and you really have to be on the ball just constantly. And it's hard. So I burned most of my 20s and 30s doing that. And so in later years, I, again, still enjoy that, but I don't like the deadlines. So I do it on my own time. I started a little comedy website of my own that I post to whenever I feel like it. And I wrote this book called How to Write Funny, which has all the 11 funny filters and how to write humor spelled out. It was my first nonfiction, non-humorous book. And that was the basis of the program that I developed at Second City, where I train people to write comedy. And a lot of those people go on to work in comedy professionally, some with The Onion, some with Clickhole, which is another Onion website. Yeah. And so that's really fun to me, because I always used to do that at The Onion. I would mentor people and sort of train them how to do it. And now I'm just doing it outside of The Onion. The program at Second City is in partnership with The Onion, but their name is on it. I basically run it. And so that's been really fun. And I do a podcast where I interview people in comedy about their process and how they write jokes.
Do they ever surprise you in what they say?
Yeah. So there are many commonalities, but everybody's different. Everybody has their own little way of coming up with jokes. And we were talking before about, like, people are complex.
Yes,
and,
they are. Layers.
There are so many layers, and people are so contradictory. And I've learned, like, the older I get, people ask me a question, I'm like, I could answer that in one of two completely opposing ways. And both answers would be true. So I don't think we live in a post-truth world, but in that aspect, when it comes to people, we're all so very contradictory. And so there are things that people do to write humor or to pursue their passion, be it humor or whatever it is, that worked for them and like may not work for somebody else. And that's fascinating to me. So I love talking to people about how they got into comedy and how they do comedy.
Flourished, hopefully.
Yeah, most of them flourish.
flourish.
some of them are young or haven't flourished or aren't famous, but I think they're really skilled and they know a lot, and so I'll interview them. So it's not just like famous comedians, though there are plenty of those famous comedy people who I interview on the show.
You mentioned passion earlier as not being enough.
I don't think passion is enough. I think persistence and hard work is the thing that you need. Because I've had passion for things and I'll just like pump my fist in the air at home and then I'll take a nap. And it's like, well, what did that get me? I got really excited there for something. You need to buckle down and you need to actually do the work, the backbreaking, grinding work of producing something. And what that does is it creates habits. So now you're producing, you're doing work. And as you do work, you learn and you get better at it.
Yes.
And the more you get better at it, the more that passion starts to look like a talent, because you love doing it and you want to do it, so you do it all the time and you get good at it. You know, there's that whole Malcolm Gladwell theory of the 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
I kind of buy that. Like, I just have seen it too many times to not take stock in that. I really think that's accurate. And if you look at The Onion, it took about 10 years, which is what he calls 10,000 hours, 10 years of obsessive commitment to something.
Yes.
It took about 10 years for The Onion to really hit it big. We started in 1988, and by 1998, we were on our way to becoming a household name, because we'd finally, after that time, figured out how to write satire well.
Well, it takes longer than you think.
Yeah.
Than anyone thinks. That's,
Yeah.
but you know, you do have the arc of continuity and persistence.
Yeah,
It's
and
character building.
Yeah, no, it's like you pay those dues, and you need to. And so many people getting started, they want to know the shortcuts.
No shortcut.
There really aren't. Like, there are ways you can do it smarter,
Right.
but like any stand-up comedian will tell you, it takes 10 or 15 years of being a road comic before you're really good. And so now there's more instruction on how to do that. You know, you can get my book, you can go to classes, and you can maybe shorten that time a little bit, but there's something about the dues paying where you grow as a person to the point where you are capable of handling the success if you get it. Because if you get success too
That's a whole
soon,
other issue.
you can't handle it.
Yes.
Because like you know, with Chris Farley, great example, he couldn't handle it.
Yes.
He got it too soon.
Yes.
And it's heavy stuff. Like,
It is.
when you turn to comedy.
Unknowable unless it's happened to you.
Yeah, when you become funny to fill some emotional hole, which most people do, and then you get to be really successful at it, and you realize, hey, wait a minute, the hole isn't filled. I'm still sad and lonely on the inside. That's devastating, because this thing that you worked your whole life on to get doesn't work.
No, it
Chevy
doesn't.
Chase was in a couple of movies that I did, and he's a good example of that. He had a really tough childhood, but became a really big movie star in the 70s and on SNL and everything. And he said, oh yeah, you never fill the hole. You can't fill the hole. Like, to him, it was
I
just
don't
like
agree with that.
impossible.
I think different ways.
He meant through comedy.
Oh, through
work.
comedy, yes.
You absolutely can fill
Right.
it through other ways. You have to, maybe you have to go to therapy.
Yes.
You have to have a family. You have to work on yourself.
Right.
But yeah, you
Inner
can't
journey.
You can't achieve it by just doing the
Now,
comedy.
you started out in troubled times as a child. I've heard you comment.
Yeah.
And your desperation that you'd consider suicide at 3rd grade. Who knew that you could think that way? And that you ran across Mad Comics at the time. What about Mad tickled you so much that you suddenly engaged in life?
Yeah, Mad Magazine was kind of a revelation to me. I didn't realize that you could make fun of everything.
Right.
And that was okay, because my life was very serious, and my family was very humorless, and I don't remember a lot of laughter, you know, in the home. And it was just very stressful and very serious. And so Mad Magazine didn't take anything seriously.
Right.
And
Gave you distance.
yeah, I don't recall ever like laughing out loud at it. It wasn't like that. It was more like the idea of it, that you could do all this crazy, fun, silly stuff. It was an escape for me to go into this world where you could make fun of anything and nothing was sacred. And so it really opened up a new world for me that I could do that I could make fun of things and I could pursue comedy as a way to make life more fun and less serious.
But I think now your life is better. I sense it's better.
It is.
As a human being, we're not talking the
is.
exterior. So there's a reward in hanging on, is there not? Humor is health giving, in a way.
Yeah, so again, people are contradictory, so I can give you two different answers for that.
Two? I like that.
Yes, in a way it's good, but did humor do it? Maybe. Humor may have been a stepping stone for me because humor gave me a career, you know, when I was a young person. And I knew I needed to work in comedy in some way when I was young. Didn't know how or where I would, you know, ever do that, but I just knew I had to. And so, you know, having that established, I certainly got to that point around age 35, 40, where I realized I was really successful, but it wasn't filling the hole. And that was a real crash for me. And so then I started working on myself and realizing, okay, humor isn't who I am, it's just what I do. And I had to figure out who I was. And that's tricky. So the contradictory answer is, I used to be a funny guy in high school. I was Mr. Laugh-A-Minute, class clown, whatever. I thought I was going to be a performer. And once I started doing comics and then doing The Onion, all my comedy energy was channeled into writing and print, and I wasn't a performer anymore. And because that was kind of sapping all my comedy energy, I had none left. So in person, I became a really flat, like really incredibly low-key, quiet person. Some would even say like morose, because I just didn't have it anymore.
But you have it now.
I feel like I have it now. I feel like I'm getting it back, yes.
I have to end. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. You got an ending.
And a beginning. So
Yes.
we learn a great deal from Scott. Take what you have and move it. Be persistent. Surround yourself with good people. Know when things like Onion Labs don't truly appeal to you. Know that what you do is not who you are. Clean up your act inside in whatever way you can. Know that the game that you played in your 20s and 30s may not be the game for you later on in life. Know that there are changes in life that make other opportunities are not available, but maybe that you condense or integrate the out and the in so that you have the complexity he talks about, and also the they call it the gestalt, but it's really the blooming of a person. So thank you for tuning in. Do something kind for someone you know and someone you don't know, and do it again next week. We'll see you. Thank you, Scott.
To contact Junia, send her an email at juniadonsthespark@gmail.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadonthespark.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on Junia Doan's The Spark.
Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.